Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please do go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're logging in from today. We'll just wait a few minutes as everyone keeps joining. We're very excited. We have a lot of attendees joining from across the region and across the world, really. So really, really excited to welcome everyone. I see in the chat that we have presence from the Philippines, from the Netherlands, from Bangladesh, from Thailand, from Laos. Must be very early in the Netherlands. Thank you for joining us. From Algeria, wow. Really, a worldwide audience today. Okay, I'll give it a few minutes. And while I do that, I'll keep welcoming everyone and, letting everyone just introduce themselves in the chat. Welcome to all. As we do that, we're just really excited to be hosting this webinar today to officially launch our EdTech landscape analysis, which has been a product of real months of collaboration, collaboration around research efforts to better understand the landscape of EdTech in the region. So as a result of that, through the report's development, 20 EdTech providers and 6 EdTech funders across the region were interviewed, where we asked for them to share their perspectives, their insights on priorities in design and investments, and the different considerations they had when it comes to scaling EdTech interventions that specifically target marginalized learners across Southeast Asia. So as I mentioned, it's been a real collaborative effort, and that's why we're so excited to bring to you a really cross-sectoral panel today. So we are excited to, and you'll get to know our panelists as we speak, because we'll continue on to a interactive dialogue between ministries of education and between different EdTech providers that have a presence in the region. So from the Ministry of Education side, we have the participation of Director Jerson from the Philippines Department of Education, Madam Aniza from the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, and we will shortly be joined by Mr. Irshad from the Ministry of Education in Indonesia. He's just running late in another meeting. And this would not be, this will really be brought to life through an interactive dialogue with the private sector, in which we have EdTech providers, including Ms. Kim from Let's Read, Ms. Stefina from Kipin, and Mr. Travis from ViewHop. So, before we jump into this interactive dialogue, I just thought I'd really highlight a few different findings from our study that have emerged. Firstly, EdTech is expanding, but we've observed that it's unevenly reaching marginalized learners. While digital platforms and tools are increasingly being used to build foundational skills, evidence of effectiveness for marginalized groups in the region remains limited and uneven. The EdTech landscape analysis also found that some providers face gaps in analytical capacity, limiting their ability to measure impact rigorously, generate evidence, and to use data to inform design and scaling decisions. Secondly, we've observed that design efforts show promise, but they are not yet systematic. So across the EdTech provider side, we saw that many providers are localizing content, developing offline-first solutions, and adding accessibility features for students with disabilities and diverse needs. But these practices are not yet widespread. So through this dialogue, we'll urge our audience to also think about why not, and how can we kind of move towards a world where the inclusive practices are available across the board and do inform design. And finally, scaling remains the major challenge. And this is going to be a huge discussion point today, because providers were seen to be eager to expand, but they face constraints related to funding, infrastructure, and to adapting their solution to new contexts. This could also be in part due to the very diverse nature of the region, but we are really keen to hear from our panelists today to learn more about how can we move towards a world where we design for scale. And to design for scale, how can we design for the most marginalized? So within that, we find that partnerships are critical but complex. So this is where we really want to bring this dialogue to life, because effective collaboration with governments, NGOs, communities, and other stakeholders is essential for reaching marginalized learners. Yet building trust, aligning priorities, and navigating differing capacity levels and processes can slow down progress. And finally, impact is valued, but defined differently. Funders consistently highlight educational impact and sustainability as priorities, but their definitions of impact and methods for measuring it vary, making it hard to compare across interventions. So with that, I'll begin with some house rules, and then I will hand over to some colleagues for opening remarks. But really want to begin by thanking our panelists and thanking our audience for spending time with us on a Monday afternoon. We will, in terms of house rules, we will just make sure that microphones are muted, and there'll be different opportunities for question and answer in the chat, but also later on in the session, we will close the session with an interactive Q&A piece so that we really engage with your ideas, your thoughts, and your considerations today. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the Executive Director of EdTech Hub, Ms. Verna Lalbihari, who unfortunately would love to join us, but it's 2 a.m. in the US, and therefore she has pre-recorded her contribution to the session. Jill, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. It's a privilege to have honorable officials from the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, as well as the wider EdTech community with us today. As you would expect, due to time zone differences, I can't be with you live on the webinar today. I don't think you'd want to see the 2 a.m. version of Verna. That said, I really did not want to miss the opportunity to be part of this important event. I'm really excited for the launch of our EdTech landscape analysis of Southeast Asia, developed under the ASEAN UK SAGE program. This report has been months in the making, shaped through deep collaboration with regional partners, especially those in the private sector. Throughout the process, we were so pleased with the eagerness across the region to learn, share experiences, and strengthen collective efforts towards equitable and inclusive digital education. As we all know, EdTech is a rapidly evolving space, yet evidence on impact lags behind, particularly for the marginalized learners. This work is a step toward addressing the limited evidence gap and building a stronger knowledge base for Southeast Asia. Today's conversation aims to move us from evidence to action. We are bringing together policymakers and EdTech providers to reflect on what has been done, what more is needed, and where gaps and opportunities may lie. The aim is to explore how partnerships can be fostered to ensure technology not only innovates, but truly transforms and reaches the learners who are most often left behind. Thank you for making the time to be here with us today, and I'm certain that you will have an engaging and fruitful conversation. Back to you, Hani.
All right, thank you so much for that, Jill. So today we have a group of seasoned panelists joining us. As I've said, that we have Director Jerson from the Philippines, we have Madam Aniza from Malaysia, and we have Dr. Irshad who'll be joining us from Indonesia shortly. We also have representatives from EdTech providers in the region. And so today our panelists will be talking about their priorities and vision for EdTech, advancing equity by design, So they'll really be unpacking, measuring what matters, reaching those who matter, and enabling scale and sustainability, and thinking about the policies and enabling environments, and as well as the partnership models that make that work. So with that, without further ado, I would love to just I would love to just begin by opening the discussion, and for just our ministry officials, if you could please begin by introducing us to the context you work in. And I'll start by just trying to understand what are the different EdTech priorities and the policies that you're kind of working within, and to what extent do these cater to the needs of marginalized learners? Director Jerson, if I could please start with you.
Sure. Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Hani. And thank you, EdTech Hub, for the invitation. Um, I am so just a bit about where I work and the day-to-day, I suppose. I'm the director of the Bureau of Learning Delivery. We're the bureau in the Philippines, Department of Education, that's in charge of translating curriculum into these learning experiences and into classroom practice. So we help the teachers, the supervisors, the specialists. We try to weave together all of these different pieces in what teachers use in the classroom practice, whether they're the resources, whether these are teaching guides, whether even we support upskilling and capacity building, just so that learning will happen inside the schools. And as you can see in the Philippines, just for everyone who's outside of the Philippines, it's quite um, a broad scope. We have around almost 23 to 27 million learners across all of our 42 to 45,000 public schools in the Philippines. And then we also cater from kindergarten up until grade 12. So that's the basic education system that we have. So in terms of edtech, and when we think about the role of technology, then it becomes a bit more complex, as you can imagine, the diversity of the contexts that we have. In terms of access, you have schools who are well equipped with wonderful internet connectivity, air conditioning. You have robotics laboratories, some virtual reality headsets, and very reliable internet and electricity. But then you have schools also, perhaps in the nearby municipality or in rural areas, or those last hard to reach areas where even 4 hours or electricity of stable electricity is a luxury, or internet probably is being used or accessed through mobile data, or even through intermittent connections. Sometimes even the devices is shared across multiple classrooms or across multiple teachers. We have that wide range. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have as DepEd. When you look at it from a central office perspective, that's where I work at, but also looking at it from a local perspective, it's just massive differences and massive inequities when it comes to resources. And that's one of the biggest priorities and the biggest things that keep me up at night, at least for me and for our office as well, is just to think about how can we offer this baseline of connectivity, of internet, of electricity, and of devices, so that all schools will have a chance at using and integrating technology. And I think one of the ways of how we're doing it is we're really trying to veer away from the current status quo, the status quo now of how we plan our edtech initiatives, which is somewhat, usually it's a bit centralized, I must admit, where you have a one-size-fits-all type of approach. We have a one-size-fits-all approach right now, currently, of how we provide smart TVs, e-learning cards or laptops and computers as standard baseline for how computer laboratories are provided to schools, no matter how big or how small the enrollment is. It's not much context aware. So that's one of the biggest priorities that we have now as a department, is to ensure that our policies or how we support EdTech is context aware. By that, we mean, how could we learn more about a school's context, not just by whether they have internet or not, but where they're located, who the learners are, whether the teachers have capacity, how are they teaching, What's the leadership like? What's the enabling environment like? Or how enabling is the environment for learning to happen with respect to digital technology? And what we're trying to figure out, and maybe some of our folks here in the webinar might also help us, but what we're trying to figure out is what's the spectrum of digitalization or of edtech use in all our schools, because somehow the culture also is we have a very singular aspiration of or singular idea of what a digitalized school might look like, and sometimes it's not necessarily fit for the purpose of our own school. And for me personally, as a classroom teacher before also, my view of technology, I'm actually a techno skeptic, which is ironic because I do work on edtech, but I'm more of a skeptic in a sense that I look at good teaching with technology as first and foremost good teaching, period. So if you're a good teacher, pedagogy really has to start, or there has to be foundations of how people learn and how teachers use technology. And so these are some strategies, and we might, you can share more maybe later, but generally how we're looking at it is making sure that all schools have access to the technology, but at the same time balancing it with a context-aware perspective, a spectrum, if you will, different visions of how technology could be used in classrooms, but essentially they all should support a more human-centered education or human-centered learning experience. Yeah, happy to be here with other ministry officials as well, and the private sector partners and all the guests in the webinar. So happy to share more later in the conversation.
Director Jerson, thank you so much. I loved what you said about balancing a spectrum of different visions for how tech can be used in the classroom. So really thinking about needs of marginalized learner in a very holistic space, rather than, something that you either do cater to needs or you don't. That's incredibly useful. I'd love to now hand over to Madam Aniza from the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, and just to learn a bit more about how, what Malaysia's EdTech priorities are when it comes to, leveraging EdTech.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. When we talk about the national priorities and vision for education technology in Malaysia, and for Malaysia, we are already centered on the fundamental principle, which is the human-centric digital transformation. And as you all know, now we are actually, for Malaysia, we have this the cornerstone of the Malaysian digital economy blueprint. And we also have our own digital education policy that is for Ministry of Education. And let me also mention that in Malaysia, we have around 10,277 schools, primary and secondary, with more than 400,000 teachers, and around 10,000, and with students around 5.2 million, And when we talk about our strategic priority in Malaysia, it has evolved from infrastructure to pedagogical innovation. But of course, we must admit that the digital divide still exists, but we're working very hard to make sure that the infrastructure also reach the rural areas. And we are also moving beyond using technology for administrative case, and actually moving towards creating personalizing, engaging, and effective learning experience for every student. And for that also, maybe I can also mention that in Malaysia, we also working towards this AI-powered classroom. For now, it's in the pilot project still. So we hope that by early next year, we'll be able to see some school which have maybe have shown some development in terms of AI-powered classroom, so that we can disseminate these ideas to other schools, maybe in 3 phases. And also in terms of the digital education policy, in terms of the current progress and key initiatives, we also have our dilemma, which is known to many around the world, which is the Digital Educational Learning Initiative Malaysia. Again, this is a single unified gateway for more than 5.5 million users, which include the teachers, administrators, and students. and we work very closely with international partners like Google, Microsoft, and Apple, alongside with locally developed content. Then beyond the platform, we also have digital textbooks, teacher professional development, and also content development, and they are all can be accessed at the platform and also outside the platform, whereby in terms of the professional development, we have the professional development activities, programs, online and also offline, yeah. And to ensure equity and inclusion, which is the main topic of today's presentation, we know that we must address the equity, which means focusing on our marginalized students. So when we talk about in Malaysia, we also in terms of Malaysian context, which refer to a diverse group of students, for example, from the low-income students, from the low-income households. Here we're talking about the rural and the remote schools especially, and also those in rural and remote schools, as well as the indigenous students, the orang asli, and students with special educational needs, and the focus, we also focus our education priorities towards the students who are in unique educational models, such as students in specialized urban centers, for the street-involved children, and those children in the remote residential K9 schools, and our approach to support these students and schools, we have a multi-pronged and rooted, high-level policy. For example, we have the 7 trusts of the Ministry of Education, which is the 7 core of excellence, and which we have launched on specific interventions, namely the device access, and here we have also involved our strategic partners, and also NGOs to actually provide devices to these students, and for example, by the end of last year, one foundation, which is called Yayasan Didik Negara, has given more than 4,000 laptops to marginalized students nationwide, And we are also running the digital outreach program, which brings tailored digital literacy, training and resources for students in hard-to-reach areas. So we are talking about those in the remote areas, and also for the K9 schools. K9 schools meaning the students, previously the building is meant to be for primary school, but to cater for those students who actually have problems to access to secondary school. So what we do, we have this primary school, we upgrade the school so that those in the lower secondary school can actually gain access to education at the primary school, but with we upgrade the school so that those in the first 3 years of secondary school can also have access to education without having to go to another area or have to commute with a very long distance, And then in terms of connectivity, we have also collaborate with other government agencies. And mind you, when I talk about our vision for EdTech, it has to be across ministry. So we are also working very closely with, for example, our Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Multimedia, to name a few, and also the NGOs, and also other strategic partners. Okay, and then in terms of connectivity, we are also adopting and also exploring satellite and other last-mile solutions to ensure students in hostels in remote areas have meaningful digital access. And the students also, the schools have subscribed to Starlink for at least we're talking about almost 600 schools, outside or in the remote areas. In terms of inclusive content, we also have developed digital resources. Again, these kids can access through the Delima platform just now, the one I mentioned, So all these technology and also resources. It's actually not just a source of greater division, but great equalizer to make sure that the students in the remote area as well as in the urban, semi-urban, semi-rural areas, they can have access to good and quality education. And if I may add, in terms of partnership, in collaboration with EdTech providers, we have hundreds of partnerships, which comes from outside Malaysia and also locally, which they all help in terms of our transformational partnership, and this is important because we want to engage with more deeply in areas of curriculum alignment, in terms of data-driven insights and also sustainable and scalable models, talking about developing sustainable, affordable, and scalable solutions to all 10,241 of our schools. So if I may conclude, in terms of our priorities and also our vision for education technology in Malaysia, we are very committed to building a vibrant, inclusive, and innovative digital education ecosystem. And I'm sure we are not doing this alone. We have a clear vision. The government has a clear vision. The Ministry of Education has a clear vision to make sure that we have a significant progress. And we certainly extend our invitation to our educational tech partners to join in our national mission to make sure that we shape the future of our learning of our Malaysian children in the right path. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Anisa. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that at the end of your discussion, you were talking a bit more on the partnership side, and that's something we would really love to probe with our EdTech providers in the room. Before I do that, though, Dr. Irshad, thank you so much for joining us. We have Dr. Irshad here from the Ministry of Education from Indonesia. If you could please spotlight him, Jill. Wonderful.
Thank you.
I'd love for you, Dr. Irshad, to share a little bit about Indonesia's priorities and how partnerships play a role in that. So, Director Jerson talked a little bit about how, I guess, how the Philippines, how DepEd is understanding the inclusive use of EdTech, whereas Madam Anisa from Malaysia was talking about the partnerships that are driving the inclusive, opportunities for more inclusion around EdTech. I'd love to hear from you on Indonesia's side, because I'm also aware that Indonesia itself brings such diversity as a country.
Thank you, Annie, and my apology. I'm late. I had another meeting before. Thank you for framing this important discussion. And I think for Indonesia, we see EdTech is a strategic level to achieve more equitable access to quality education, especially for marginalized learners. As you know, Indonesia is one of the largest education systems in the world, maybe. We have more than 50 million students and over 4 million teachers spreading across more than 400,000 schools in the country. And the nature of our country is archipelagic country. We have more than 17,000 islands in the country. So you can imagine how vast the scale of our system. And our schools, of course, range from urban centers with high connectivity to remote islands and border areas where access remains a challenge. And while digital transformation has accelerated in recent years, but digital inequity or digital divide still persists because not all learners and teachers have equal access to devices, to reliable internet, or especially the skills they needed to fully leverage the technology in the learning process. And these realities, I think, shape how we think about EdTech. We believe that we need not a uniform solution to our reality. So EdTech is one of the tools and the solution that we can have to be adapted to tackle our education challenge in the country. And to address this digital digital inequity, the government has been prioritizing equitable access to digital tools and connectivity. For example, since since this year, we start actually couple or more 5 years back, we start distributing like laptops and computers to our schools. And this year we start distributing interactive flat panel devices to our schools nationwide, so that even those in remote areas can benefit from modern interactive learning resources. We also provide school with internet connectivities in cooperation with other ministries, right? I heard Malaysia has done so because we cannot work alone. We have to collaborate with other agencies and other ministries to provide connectivity to our schools, especially the internet connectivity. We work closely with operators to expand our coverage to underserved regions. We also provide platforms, digital platforms. We have an umbrella educational platforms we call Rumah Pendidikan, or education house, literally translated from Indonesian. So Rumah Pendidikan houses many apps, many digital apps, education apps provided for students, for teachers, for schools, for governments, and also for communities, for public who want to have more partnership in giving the solution to our educational problems. So we have in Rumah Pendidikan, it's like umbrella platform. We have one of the apps that under this umbrella is Ruang Murid, or student apps, where we provide like many learning resources to our students, and it's free to access. And through initiatives like distant learning for children of migrant workers in border areas, we use this Ruang Murid, or learning resources for students. We use this to ensure the continuity of learning for students who might otherwise be excluded. Yes, especially areas, students with challenge to access a formal education, or they have formal education but cannot attend school on daily basis regularly like their peers. Yeah. So we provide this Rumah Pendidikan. We have the distant learning program to cater this children. And We also introduce since this semester, because we see that digital literacy is also important. Starting this semester, we also introduce an elective subject on coding and AI for our students in our national curriculum, starting from grade 5 in the primary up to high schools. Now there are about perhaps 9,000 schools who hope to teach this new subject. I think I will stop here. Back to you again, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Irshad. Thank you. That's a very comprehensive example. And I think what I've really appreciated from our three ministerial panelists is that we've touched upon pedagogy, we've touched upon obviously hardware and infrastructure, but really around what kind of partnerships are required to implement. So, one of the key findings in the landscape analysis was that around that national education strategies across the region recognize that successful implementation can be enhanced with engagement with local partners. So I'd love to hear from the EdTech providers now around what role partnerships have played in bringing these different visions to life, if there are any particular government policies or approaches that have done well to nurture private sector relationships and therefore to help catalyze EdTech implementation specifically for marginalized learners. So I'd love to kind of hear your experience to see if you'd also have any suggestions to help enhance partnership approaches. Perhaps we can begin with, I saw a nod from Travis. So Travis, if you want to kick us off.
Sure, I'm always happy to talk. Hi, everyone. Thank you for letting me be here to share my thoughts and experience. I really appreciate the panel and the experience. It's really interesting to see these perspectives. For us, very specifically, the Hub that I've been working at for the past 3.5 years at this point is that we've been able to partner with other local communities. We've been able to partner with other companies in order to be able to bring education technology to remote areas such as schools, providing different types of libraries, different types of functions that are simple to use and implement because they didn't necessarily have anything prior to that. So being able to have types of libraries, being able to have specific tools in order to help like a teacher engage a class, to be able to do polls, do questions, and so on. When you have classrooms of up to 60 students, it's very difficult to do anything but rote memorization a lot of the time. So being able to implement just even little simple solutions like that make a big difference, especially in rural areas. I think I was listening to an audiobook this morning. There's something very interesting for me was that a lot of these rural areas, being able to just have these little simple tools at times is extremely meaningful because it adds so much value to their learning. It's something that they want to be doing. It's something to be able to better their life for the future a lot of the time. Something that a lot of us in the developed cities or in developed countries, we take advantage of that completely. So if we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, what we have to do is think about simplicity, streamlining with other partners and with local governments in order to be able to provide a lot of value to them. And I think they appreciate that. From what I can see is that we can continue to be able to create partnerships. And I think one thing that's really great about being in Vietnam is that the government is very open to different types of partnerships. They're always welcoming of new ideas and innovations into the country. So that way we can push the education forward. I think we're in a very unique spot here in Vietnam. And I've been here for the past 10 years working on educational projects. So I just continually see a bright future for this country in terms of not only the partnerships, but also what we can provide, because everybody's just so welcoming to new innovative ideas, especially with education technology.
Thank you, Travis. It was great to hear about your experience in Vietnam. And I'd love to hear now from Kim and Stefina. They're both operating in countries where actually Indonesia and Philippines, where we've heard from the different ministry officials. So I'd actually love to open the floor to both of you to hear about, your different experience in the Philippines or Indonesia context. Stefina, perhaps we can start with Indonesia and then we can move over to the Philippines, Kim.
Okay, thank you so much, Hani, and thank you, EdTech Hub, for having this panel. Bit of introduction. My name is Stefina. I'm the Chief Business Officer of Kipin. We are based in Indonesia, and we are a company that really focuses exactly on the students that this panel is talking about. We focus on rural learners. We focus on how do we bring digital learning to those schools, those students, of which we have tens of millions, as Irshad mentioned, in Indonesia, a lot of students are still struggling with internet access. So if you imagine, those schools in the most remote areas, they don't have access to internet, electricity sometimes. How are they supposed to be included in this sort of digital 4.0 world that many of us live in? So what we do is we actually have, provided this device. You just deploy it in a classroom. In 3 minutes, you just turn it on and students can access all of the Ministry of Education's, content, like videos, books, quizzes, and whatnot, but they don't need internet. So that's a bit about what we do. I think on your question, Honey, about, sort of government policies, things that have worked for us, I think Pak Irshad brought up a really good point. Indonesia's huge. Indonesia and education is extremely local, right? So Indonesia has all sorts of like little cultures and little places within it. It doesn't make sense for us to think about sort of a uniform blanket way to pilot something across the nation. Where we've seen it work really well, though, is when, you're able to sort of marry the government regulation together with the private sector innovation, that really flourishes in specific areas. So, for example, we've had really successful pilots, let's say even in like Grobongan, that's in Central Java. For example, there's a couple of schools there. Previously, they're not able to, use tablets in the classroom, but actually the local government decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to allow this pilot to happen and see what happens. And they see, up to 65% increase in reading and writing scores, because now they can access all of these digital learning tools that they didn't have before. So that was a wonderful way where, the government has reach into those schools. The government has authority in those schools, and we have innovations that can help those schools. So marrying those two, I think, can make really, really great impact. And if we can scale, those kinds of pilots across our 17,000 islands, imagine the kind of impact that we can have nationwide. So that's a little bit from us.
And Stefina, before we move over to Kim, I'd love to actually hear a little bit about that model. So you mentioned tablets within a school. Is it mostly used for assessment purposes? How is it used? Learning content as well. Is there one tablet for multiple students, or how does it work?
Yeah, so we don't actually sell tablets from our side, but what we serve is it's like a local server with all of the content inside of it already. The tablets actually don't have SIM cards in many situations. So you imagine these kids are no longer, they're not going to TikTok, they're not going over to the danger sides of the internet. They're using it purely as a learning device. And that's sort of what we've seen work really well in a lot of settings where you can start shifting. I think someone mentioned about one of the challenges of digital implementation being sometimes teachers, sometimes systems, they need time to familiarize themselves with digital, and digital can be really scary. So removing some of those layers of, the dangers of internet allowed these tablets to actually land much better inside the schools. And they're already teaching using the government curriculum, which they will be using every day in their learning anyway. So removing any and all barriers and challenges so that it really seamlessly enters their day-to-day learning. I think that's what's worked really well. Yeah.
We seem to have lost Honey. Nima, do you mind checking? Or Jazz?
Thank you so much, Stefina. I think we might have lost Hani. So thank you so much for those insights. Till Hani rejoins, could we just hand it over to Kim? We'd love to hear some of your insights as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello po. Magandang hapon from the Philippines. Thank you so much to EdTech Hub for inviting us. So I'm from the Asia Foundation, the Education Governance Manager. So just a bit of overview on the Asia Foundation. We're an international nonprofit organization and is actually present in 18 country offices across Asia and the Pacific. So we hope to be able to contribute to improving learning outcomes here in the country through a more strengthened approach to education governance and shared accountability. So just on Let's Read. Let's Read is a free digital library housing around more than 10,000 storybooks in different languages in Asia. The library can be accessed via web and or downloaded in mobile phones. Our storybooks come in various categories in social emotional learning content in different reading levels. And these books can actually be printed and downloaded for offline use. So there are also accessible features like audio and sign language translations for some languages. So for us to ensure the effective use of Let's Read in communities and in schools, relevant data and priorities are important to consider. The openness as well of partnerships from government agencies is equally important. So thank you so much to Director Jerson for sharing the current priorities of DepEd in terms of EdTech access in schools, making it more context specific and relevant to the communities and the learners themselves. So yes, context matters. Collaboration and complementation in EdTech solutions and actually just sort of bringing it in and incorporating it in already existing government programs is an approach that worked for Let's Read. For example, just a quick story. For example, a fifth-class municipality in the province of Lanao del Sur in the Bangsamoro region here in the Philippines. So Let's Read, its digital library and its potential as a way to improve literacy of learners in their municipality. So this municipality has, it's a fifth-class municipality, so very low in income. They have limited digital capacity and infrastructure, but with the current resources they have, the local chief executive or the mayor decided to really prioritize reading in their local language. And the data that came from the schools and DepEd really helped the local chief executive to sort of prioritize programs that they will be investing in. So they decided to prioritize reading. They found that they lack storybooks actually in their local mother tongue. And their teachers, they don't have that much capacity to maximize existing digital resources that they have to teach reading. And of course, parents in their community are not that engaged in terms of their children's education. So this sort of context and data really push the local government in partnership with the school to take on a community-based approach in reading programs and reading remediation. So the local government invested in increasing available books in their local mother tongue through the book adaptation process in the Let's Read website or in the Let's Read platform. At the same time, equipping the teachers in sort of maximizing and accessing the digital library and maximizing their current digital resources. So as Director Jerson mentioned, it's a case-to-case basis in terms of digital capacity in the whole country. So in the case of this municipality, they probably have just one or two monitors and computers in their school, but all the teachers have mobile gadgets. So they were able to maximize their current resources to access Let's Read and the storybooks that we've created. So even with the limited digital capacity, the schools in partnership with the local government really maximized this opportunity to be able to provide equitable access to learning resources in their community. So Let's Read as a digital library as well as an innovation lent in itself to the mayor and the school. So sort of promoting that shared accountability and responsibility between local governments, the community, the parents, and the Department of Education through the schools is very important. So just to be able to expand and sustain these good practices, these innovations, the education system and EdTech solutions need to be more locally driven and led. Innovations should be designed where the learners are, which is at the school level. So that would make EdTech solutions more relevant and really be effective. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Kim, actually, you ended with a word that we're going to probe a little more into. You ended with the word effective. So actually in our landscape analysis, we found that evidence of EdTech's effectiveness in improving learning outcomes in the region remains quite limited and uneven. So our review of private provider interventions revealed that very few had any documented impact. And there were challenges reported around no unified framework or standard for assessing effectiveness. So I know that, one aspect, right, is when we're thinking about marginalized learners is to think about access and reach. But the other, aspect is really what impact is this having on learning? So I'd love we're going to flip this question around where we'll begin with our EdTech provider colleagues to learn about what your thoughts are around measuring for effectiveness. And then we'll then hear from Ministry of Education colleagues to understand, what that looks like when it comes to the policy landscape, if that makes any procurement decisions challenging when there is no effectiveness data, and how they're kind of going about that to, make decisions in a world in which there is limited evidence available. So Kim, I see you're still up there on my screen, so I'd love for you to come in, and then we can hand over. We'll work backwards, back to Stefina, Travis, and then to the Ministry of Education colleagues.
Thank you so much, Hani. Yes, just on the measures that matter. So open data and information is very important. It's very crucial in terms of, providing EdTech solutions that are relevant and effective. In the Philippines, and I hope Director Jerson will be speaking about it some more. In the Philippines, there are a lot of assessments, but particularly there is a comprehensive rapid literacy assessment that identifies learners needing support in literacy, and that helps teachers identify what type of intervention they'll be able to give the learners. So there is data from the Department of Education also on the last mile schools with limited internet, electricity, and so on and so forth. But I believe and we hope that each school and local government unit should also have sort of a unified information system on all learners, with information including the reading levels, numeracy levels, and including information on children with disabilities, indigenous peoples. Measures that matter are that of learners' learning performance and data that captures all learners from back when they were early childhood to until they graduate, to be able to demonstrate that the education system is working, the EdTech solutions that we provided are working. And there should be a clear pathway for the learners, and that would be able to help organizations, stakeholders to provide the necessary support per learning pathway that they would be going through. At the end of the day, we should look into the learner as the center of innovations. So of course, productive citizens are the best measure of EdTech solutions and education systems in terms of improving learning outcomes. So I guess just data on a learner just going through the pathway journey from early childhood, the necessary skills that they should be acquiring during that stage, and so on and so forth. Those information and data should be available not just for government, but also for private sector and non-government stakeholders. Thank you.
So actually, thank you so much for that. I'm going to pivot our approach a little bit. Speaking of, making data-informed decisions. Director Jerson, since, Kim really dug into the Philippines context, I'm wondering if there's any thoughts or reactions that you have on your end, and then we'll move to Indonesia.
Yeah, right. I think one in particular, what Kim mentioned, and I think to also highlight how we're looking at EdTech. Sorry for the noise of the passing vehicles passing by, but one, of course, is learning. We have this view that technology is in service of learning. So if a learner is learning, if learners are learning, and we use that whether through the diagnostic tools that we have or summative, formative assessments that we have in schools, that's one indicator of it. But I think it's using technology for teaching and learning is much more broader than that. We also look at, of course, inclusion, and I heard my colleagues from Indonesia and Malaysia also talk about that as well, and inclusion in a way where our does the technology tools and platforms, do they offer options and alternatives for learners with different abilities or languages or customization? Even before EdTech was happening, a lot of our learning experiences, one of the buzzwords that we have in DepEd is called contextualization, sometimes to the point that it becomes too much of a buzzword now. I'm sure some of my colleagues here in the webinar who are teachers in DepEd, you've heard about contextualization workshops in some way, whether it's contextualizing the content to the local community, language, how to make it more relevant. And I think that's also one way. Particularly, we don't know yet how to measure whether a technology is contextualized enough. And I think one way to do it, of course, is just to ask students to have a way for students and teachers to offer feedback to ensure that the technology experience is appropriate for their context. One assumption there is if students continuously engage in a platform or in a technology tool, then it means we could assume that they see it as part of their context, and that's something that they see in their day-to-day life. It's something that they value and they're able to use. So that's of course one way also to look at it. And another thing also that in terms of measuring success or efficacy of technology, we're also looking at it from a lens of I guess, lack of a better word, meaning. And I also like how my colleagues from Indonesia and Malaysia talked about meaningful integration of technology. And that means is if the use of technology actually offers competencies that maybe are what we call in the invisible curriculum, which ones are building our learners towards becoming more meaningful and contributing agents of society. So whether that includes parts of critical thinking, measuring creativity, measuring how their ability to discern information, to discern whether pieces of information are relevant or not. That's also, I suppose, even if it's not an English class or a research class, these are important things that we should be measuring if we're using technology. And I think that part of, I guess some countries call it digital literacy, or some parts call it maybe being able to function in a digital or modern world. These are also things that we want to look at from the overall experience of using technology. So I think it's much more, I guess, my short point of it is, aside from measuring learning outcomes, I think measuring the efficacy of technology goes beyond learning outcomes, and we have to look at it from the experience side of things and from the various dimensions of uses of technology, which sometimes is a bit more tricky to measure. But at the same time, I then ask the question, why do we need to measure these things in tests? I mean, these could also be measured not necessarily from a database for all of the learners, but it could just be a measurement that a teacher checks in with their students and assesses whether their integration of technology is appropriate, or if it's inclusive, or if it's relevant for their context. So I also want to highlight that when we say measuring the efficacy of technology, it doesn't always have to be quantitative data at a larger scale. It could be these interactions, or it could be these moments where a teacher and a learner are having a conversation and just checking with each other if the, let's say, this learning management system or this technology or this platform, is it working for us or not? And I think this is also measurement in some way. It's not necessarily the hard data that we're looking at, but these are rich stories that I think are equally useful for us to make sure that learning happens and that technology is supporting that human experience.
Thank you, Director Jerson. I really like that you emphasize the whole relational aspect, right, of a classroom, rather than, earlier in your points, you were talking about the pedagogical and the infrastructural. Now you're talking about not just hard learning outcomes, but also the relational elements and different dimensions you can assess and measure. So I like this holistic view of any intervention in the classroom, whether it's technology enabled or not. I'm just gonna kind of shift gears, and thank you so much for introducing a dialogue and reacting to some aspects introduced by Indonesia and Malaysia earlier around the different diversity of a context, as well as how much contextualization is enough contextualization. It's a very good point. I'd love to now hear some reactions from Indonesia. Stefina, I'm going to open up to you to learn a little bit around how do we measure what matters, and then Dr. Irshad, I'd love your reaction to that.
Yeah, thank you, Hani. It's really interesting listening to the responses. I agree with a lot of points I think that were brought up. I was just thinking about this question. It's actually a little bit complex because I think when the question is asked, what metrics matter, I sort of feel like in the end, right, data is only useful in order to come to some sort of conclusion or pivot or like some sort of objective, right? So I guess actually the question that we're asking is not what metrics matter, but what matters, right? So for example, for us, obviously one key focus is really we come in at the very beginning of the learning journey, which is access, right? So I'll be so for real. I don't think we are the number one at, getting people from smart to smarter to smartest. But what we really, really, really do is help, like the measurements that we really focus on are, can we get the people who are currently invisible in the data set onto the data set? So we're, front of the funnel. For us, those metrics matter a lot because what matters to us the most is how can we get a little bit more access to people who currently just don't have that at all. So that's a little bit about how we think about it. So for example, I definitely have like anecdotes and things like that. I think qualitative metrics, and I really agree about the relational aspects of education that Pak Gerson was talking about. But I feel, for example, something that might be a little bit, for example, like different from besides learning outcomes. We did a 1-year pilot with Tanoto Foundation, which is a big foundation here in Indonesia. They're very focused on, education. What they saw was actually that our solution helped to save schools up to 1 billion rupiah per school per year. That's not a typical, I would say, a learning outcome measurement, but it matters because it helps to provide access to those resources in an easier way. Because now schools are like, hey, that saves me money. And that is part of the equation of access. Like affordability is a big part of it. So for us, that mattered a lot. Something else is like, for example, right now we're doing, a pilot with the Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, which produces a lot of the country's teachers. And we do that alongside with like Intel and some other technology partners. What we're going to measure there, of course, is a little bit more of the traditional metrics of like, okay, so how do you make digital learning more accessible to these rural schools? So the outcomes and the metrics that we're focusing on there is access as well, but it's really about, okay, how do you make it super easy for them to access? And they're going to look at it from the lens of, as a teacher and as a university that produces teachers, is this technology actually easy enough for rural schools to use? So I think I don't know if I can really pinpoint exactly like, okay, metrics ABC matter the most, but maybe where I would love to hear also, since we do have, from the government here, we have private sector here, I think this is where we can meet, right? Public and private sector, because public sector can help us provide frameworks and direction in which, to sort of bring all of us private sector folks into one direction, right? Okay, hey, we're focused on this, guys. Because us as private sectors, there's so many different problems that we could be solving, little problems, right? But what is the umbrella thing that we're trying to achieve? I think that's what would matter most in our context. So yeah, maybe that's for me.
I really like that challenge, Stefina. So it's almost a challenge to our ministerial colleagues around, trying to create that unified umbrella that catalyzes action. I like that. Dr. Irshad, I wonder if you have any reflections, based on what Stefina has shared about her organization's experience of the Indonesian sector.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I tend to agree that when we talk about measuring the effectiveness, efficacy, the impact of EdTech, it is crucial that we can make a balance between measuring learning outcomes. I think learning outcomes is important, and this is one of our priorities in our system in Indonesia. But other aspect is also important to be measured. So yeah, learning outcomes, we can talk about literacy, numeracy, equity gaps between students, between a group of students, between regions, so forth and so on. And because it gives us hard evidence of whether technology is truly improving our education. But I also agree that with Dr. Gibson, that we also need to measure teacher and student experience. Teachers feel more empowered and supported in their pedagogy, and the students find learning more engaging, more meaningful, more joyful by using the technology. I think those two are equally important to be measured to see the effectiveness of our intervention. And actually, when we talk about for data, we in Indonesia have a national assessment program. It's an annual program that measures not only student literacy and numeracy, but also the overall quality of school learning environment. And since last year, the results of this national assessment has been made publicly available. Both the analyzed data and the raw data. It's available on public. So the data can also be disaggregated by region, by socioeconomic background, gender, and other factors. And this is allowing us to see where inequalities remain and whether interventions are helping to close the gaps. And I think this hard evidence, this hard data can create a powerful foundation for evaluating the effectiveness of EdTech. You can link EdTech interventions with national assessment data. We can test whether technology is contributing to improved learning outcomes for a specific group of learners. And to make this work, we invite, actually, the government invites all stakeholders, including the EdTech providers, to collaborate. So, for example, providers can, can embed identifiers or simple tracking mechanism in their program, while us in the ministry can help connect this to the national assessment indicator. So we can collaborate on it. Alongside learning outcomes, I also agree that it is equally important to capture the teacher experience and students in using technology, because effectiveness is not only about scores, it's also about whether teachers feel empowered to integrate digital tools in their pedagogy. And we can, of course, we don't have hard evidence, available hard data on this. So we need to do some surveys, SGDs or classroom observation, and or also platform analytics. And I think we can do all of this together between government and also EdTech providers to have to see whether our intervention is effective and impactful to our students and our teachers and our whole ecosystem of education. I think I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Irshad. My takeaway from there is, I mean, many, but really around interlinking EdTech solution data with a broader, broader national assessment data or other metrics that are being used. But also you emphasize that effectiveness is not only about scores. So, and I think that's something that was a sentiment that was shared by Director Jerson from the Philippines as well. Who also just shared in the chat around measuring efficacy of EdTech tools for teachers by hours saved in lesson planning. So thinking beyond and what are the actual ramifications in the classroom. I now want to hand over to Travis to hear a little bit about, ViewHawk's experience with just thinking about effectiveness and measuring what matters.
Thank you. That's a really tricky one when you consider the mindset and what students go through in Vietnam specifically. Like, they don't just go to school, they're in private lessons, they're taking after school classes. Like, there's such a variety of education that they're receiving from different places. So it would be really difficult to say, is it just the EdTech that's effective? If you think from a business standpoint, though, you want to be thinking about profitability. And if you're thinking about profitability, you're thinking about retention, because the longer you can retain students and keep them engaged, those are measurements that we do have. And within that, we can say that, okay, so if we take the sample of our students from when they started with us and then the period of time in which their learning journey was, we can measure that and seeing between, okay, skills, sure, they went through the course. What was their engagement? Did they stay longer? Did they drop off at any period of time? So those are all tools that we can use. And I think in terms of with government is that if a lot of the programs that can be made or worked with private partners, that we could work with schools directly on these type of things and help measure that stuff. We could help provide resources to schools. So saying like, here your children have access or your students have access to these. Here is, and you could compare to the ones that are spending more time on the platform or did more questions, they're more engaged, they're interested, and the ones that didn't, that maybe they don't have access or they just dropped off. I think at the end of the day, what really matters is whether you have education technology or it's just a teacher, is that kind of what Mary Angelou always said was that people will forget what you do, they forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And I think that's really the core of every teacher, is that the only way that you're going to make an impact on a student is that they have some sort of feeling from the lesson, from the engagement that they had. And that is something that we have to do not only in a classroom of teachers, but on an education platform and how it's being delivered, how kids are interacting with that. And I think that AI in terms can play a big role in helping with that interaction and helping nurturing something outside of the classroom, maybe at home, where the teacher isn't always available. So I think there's a really good opportunity for the collaboration through not only technology, private content, but also like what's in schools, of the public schools being able to use their content and be able to figure out the most effective way and be able to measure that. There's opportunity there. It's just that kind of really need to come together and make a plan to be able to measure it. But at the end of the day, I think if you think with a business mindset, is just think about like engagement long term. How do you keep them on the platform? Are they having fun? Are they enjoying it? That would be the true measurement for success when it comes to education technology, in my opinion.
Thank you, Travis, and thank you for talking about the interaction that students themselves have with the plethora of different educational tools and spaces, and the fact that that does kind of blurry how you're seeing outcomes if you're looking at it like with that linkage. I'd love to now hear, Madam Aniza, you had shared a lot about the different interventions available across Malaysia. You had focused on, I like that you had dissected it into different aspects, right? You talked about connectivity, you talked about different digital learning platforms. Now, as you think about all these different environments, I'd love to hear from you around how Malaysia has been going about thinking about whether these interventions have been effective, or if that's something that, you feel that there's that could be an area for growth. Madam Iniza, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So we talk about education technology. Of course, there are also, always pockets of improvement, right? So when we talk about equity also, when we talk about addressing the marginalized students, we are talking about for them to have access for internet as well as for the involvement of third-party NGOs or private sectors. Now, when we talk about designing opportunity, we are talking about designing for all. We design education for all, bearing in mind that those students who are actually in the remote areas as well as in the city areas, they have equal access to internet, to quality education. Yeah. And like just now, when I mentioned about our teaching and learning platform, which is called Delima, we also have gamification as well as AI tools for the kids to explore, for the kids to be able to be creative, yeah, and be able to use their critical and creativity, yeah. And when we talk about technology and also bridging the gap in terms of geographical isolation, we have our some what we call our digital outreach program, yeah, whereby we have addressed the problems faced by the students in the remote areas. We bring some hands-on support to these kids, and we empower the teachers, yeah. And when we talk about pockets of course, we have lots of incredible innovation, yeah, but at the same time, and as well as high digital readiness, yeah, because we have programs to make sure that the students and the teachers are fluently digital, yeah, digitally fluent. And we also have programs to include the and also buy-ins from the parents as well, yeah, because when these parents they know what's happening in school, when the students go back to their houses or back home, they'll be able to support in terms of learning to their kids. Yeah, I think this is also important to be able to get the buy-ins from everyone, from all the stakeholders. Yeah. And when we talk about the equity in terms of collaborative equity framework, talking about evidence-based impact, right? So we are now moving towards it has to be beyond usage metrics and narrowing the learning gaps. Yeah, because there is some for the primary schools, we still have a small number of students who have literacy and numeracy problems. Yeah. So how do we how do we solve these problems is through technology. Yeah. Through apps and so tools which the students can access, yeah, with the help of the teachers through personalized learning as well. Yeah. So the key word here is talking about having our national Delima platform have the access to everyone. And we also use this platform, the teaching and learning platform, to make sure that the students, for some areas whereby internet is a problem, a challenge for them, we also work with some international and also local companies where the students can have an offline, yeah, programs, offline solution for those students in the AI powered classroom pilot project as well, so that the most powerful innovations can be accessed by students even in the rural areas. And last but not least, we are actually now focusing on the ratio of student and a device. For example, for a secondary school, it's 1:1, one student, one device. And for the primary, it's 1:10, but with the support from many companies, NGOs, private sectors, as well as from the government. The numbers of students getting a device for their own use in the school is now is getting higher. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Anisa. Thank you. So I think just collectively, we're talking about we were talking about effective metrics and what metrics matter. We've touched a lot upon, I know one thing that came up was data sharing, right? Whether there's, comparing different intervention data to national metrics, whether we're conducting more exploring more opportunities for data collection with this holistic understanding of, measuring what the actual impact in the classroom is, what the impact on the teachers are. So I would love to kind of think about our final question to really unpack together before we'll go into some Q&A that the audience have contributed to. But our final question is to think about one of these findings in the landscape analysis, in which we're talking a lot about enabling scale and sustainability. So EdTech providers in the landscape analysis mentioned leveraging partnerships with a range of actors, including the government, private sector, non-government organization, as well as communities to scale. And I know that we've discussed some of this in detail. I know that colleagues in Indonesia and the Philippines were talking a lot about community-based interventions, human-centered design. I know that in Vietnam, Travis, you've mentioned the different the different ways that, and kind of balancing profitability versus, integration in terms of learning outcomes. I'd also say that in our study, EdTech providers described significant barriers to scale, and these included constraints in funding, capacity, and infrastructure. EdTech funders, which in our study included venture capitalists as well as donors, also mentioned barriers when identifying and investing in scalable solutions, which included government regulation and risk-averse funding environments. So I'd love to really open up to our floor panelists to think what systemic or policy changes you think are required to support scaling inclusive interventions. So what do we need in place to scale solutions for marginalized learners, recognizing that inclusion is on its own spectrum, as was mentioned by Director Jerson, and recognizing that in some countries we work in, including Indonesia, have very localized approaches, as mentioned by Stefina and Dr. Irshad. So I'll open up to the floor here if any panelist wants to unmute. I don't want to put anyone in the hot seat. Anyone want to talk about scale? Yes, I see a hand up.
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
No, please you go.
Okay, Travis, Travis, I think you can go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. That is a very, very difficult. I'm just thinking of all through the past experiences that I've had. It just takes me back to when I was doing this UNESCO project. It was in Thailand, and it was just a huge collaboration with people from all the different areas. And the main thing is agreeing on what the problem you're trying to solve, and then working around a solution that is like kind of evergreen. And what I mean by that is that it's not a one-time payment of like sending out laptops to everywhere, because laptops break down in like 3 to 5 years, whatever it is. It has to be something much more holistic in how it's implemented. It can't be, because you have like educators who are constantly like battling between how something should be taught in methodology, or how this one app is going to work better than another app. These are all just really subjective. Like you can't really prove that kind of stuff. So when it comes to scalability, you really have to agree on, okay, what hair on fire problem are we trying to solve? And just focus on that. And then thinking about who the users are and their long-term benefits to them. Because if we're just talking about we're going to use apps and technology and stuff that we think are going to solve our problem, but we're not actually really thinking about the end user. And no offense to anything anybody said, but let's think about if kids are having problems with learning. Adam and Isa, you gave the example of numbers and like alphabet or language learning or things like that. There could be a deep-rooted issue. Like they might not be learning in a classroom. They might have learning disabilities, and I'm not sure that technology is going to solve that problem where something else might. But technology might. Like if I think about my own children, is that the use of education technology, it definitely enhances, it makes it so much better, and it closes the gap between the teacher in the classroom and what happens with parents at home. It keeps us informed, and it helps us to add value to our child's learning. Because if we're involved and we think about the child's psychology, is that they want to please the people that they look up to, their mentors, that's their parents, that's their teachers, that's the people in their neighborhood. If we can be involved in that and somehow, and technology allows that, that's scalable. And it just, whether it's a communication tool that allows us access to a portal to different things, that's really useful. There's a lot of free tools available, just as long as it's communicated clearly and there's a clear system on how to use it. I think that is the most scalable resource we have. AI is just such a wonderful thing at this point, is we can create so many tools that are free. I mean, I just jump on Google Gemini and give it a prompt in terms of like, create me a type of game that helps with numbers. I've done this with my daughter, and these things help, and she'll stay on them. She's happy. But like, we really have to think about what the problem we're trying to solve, and we all have to agree on it at a large scale, and then really pinpoint the direction that we're going. It is highly scalable. Everything is scalable if we just think hard enough about it, but we have to agree. We can't just sit debating about the different ways and pedagogy and things. We just have to agree that on ways to just really execute. And hey, execute fast, fail quickly, you can find a new way. I think, overall, the faster we do that, we don't need to spend a lot of money on it right away. We can get this done really quickly.
Travis, I know you started by saying that's a hard question, but I think you answered it in very, very different ways, including personal examples. Before I keep talking, I'd love to hear any reactions from any of our Ministry of Education colleagues. I thought it might. I thought you looked like you were about to speak,
No, I was
Director
thinking.
Thurston.
I think what Travis shared, I guess, provoked some thinking also. I think as part of the ministry, I think it's so tempting to think or to find the perfect EdTech tool or EdTech platform, then just scale it, right? And then find what are the use cases, and then we define it in XYZ, and then we just try to run with it. And I think one of the challenges there is the landscape changes, users change, the technologies change. And I think one way to reach, so there's one approach to that is, just commit to like developing a platform, whether it's a learning management system, an ecosystem of some sort, and then define it, and then have some level of control. And then as a ministry, you could just implement it in one go, and then, so that's one way. But I think the other way, I think the much more sustainable, but very tricky way is to how can we manage all this ecosystem of whether public or privately developed edtech tools, platforms, but make sure that they're interoperable in some way. And I think that's one of the, if there is a policy shift or a mindset shift that needs to happen, is the idea of interoperability. Even as a teacher, like when I was a teacher, I used multiple tools at the same time. I wasn't just subscribed to, let's say, Google or Microsoft or anything else. I would, depending on the use that I have, depending on the lesson that I had, I would navigate between multiple tools. And I think in a school level, in a classroom level, you could imagine, students and teachers navigating from different tools. But what makes it scalable, I think, in the larger ecosystem is as long as they're interoperable, in the sense whether it makes it easy for me to jump from one platform to the next, and it doesn't add any pain or frustration from the user's perspective, but also from the system's perspective. So whether that means interoperable in terms of data, wherein you have a single set of user accounts, and then that's the one that gets used to create multiple accounts in various tools, that easily scales up the usage of multiple platforms. For instance, for us, we use a single sign-on for, let's say we use, I think, Microsoft or Google. And then once we have that, that is what we use to create accounts in multiple other platforms as well. That solves one of the biggest challenges, which is, teachers or students having multiple passwords and multiple accounts. So that's one simple way of interoperability. But then other ways to really think about making things interoperable is, will the learning experience, whether it's pedagogy or whether it's the ability to share content or whether it's ability to import files, for me to submit my output from one that I made from one platform, and then I'm able to submit it in another platform, and the teacher can still track it in terms of assessment in one dashboard. That's also one way of interoperability, right? So there are multiple ways, and I think it's a policy solution, but it's also, I guess, a product solution. And I think that's also one way of how the ministries of education can play a better role of being a co-designer of these platforms. And I've heard, I forget in Malaysia how many students there are, but I was floored that Dr. Rashad, you mentioned that there were around 50 million learners in Indonesia. That's like half of what we have, and you can imagine the amount of users, the amount of teachers also that's involved in all of these platforms. And I think we do, as an education sector, we do have that, I guess, leverage in a way to ask and to collaborate with platforms and with edtech providers to maybe ask for specific features or find ways for us to not just accept platforms as they are, but it's also, we could request features. And this is one of the things that I was surprised whenever we meet with edtech providers. They always ask, what are your feature requests? And so they're always asking for these stories or these use cases from us, and we know the teachers and the students really well. And I think if we play a better role also of being that co-designer, that might also help with policy and scalability as well, because we know that these platforms are fit for purpose, and we know that if a technology or a software platform wants to support this education ecosystem, there are certain, whether data standards or functionality standards or data sharing standards, privacy standards, any of these things that they have to abide by in order to provide services to the millions of learners and teachers and parents that we have in our schools. So I think it's also a hard question. It seems very easy to answer, interoperability done, but it's actually so hard to do. You could imagine the multiple stakeholders and the multiple agencies. I think Madam Aniza mentioned also that it's not just the Ministry of Education. We have to work with Ministry of ICT, departments of data privacy, even the child support, even family and social work might also have to be part of these conversations as well. It's really hard, but I think it's a necessary. These are necessary parts of work, but they're hard. Yeah.
Yeah, short one.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think I agree that to scale the EdTech for marginalized learners, our policy focus, I think, must go beyond providing hardware and connectivity. I think it must center on building the capacity of teachers and students to use technology effectively. And I think that's the most important policy shift that we need to adopt. For teachers, this means professional development that equips them to design, for example, inquiry-driven, creative, and collaborative lesson with digital tools, moving beyond rote delivery to meaningful and joyful learning experience. And I think when teachers are empowered to be creative and literate in digital pedagogy, they will find their own way to access and adapt, relevant tools, even without direct government provision. This is to show that, teacher innovation is, I think, is often the most powerful driver of sustainable change. Yeah, I think I will stop with that here.
Thank you, Dr. Irshad. Really appreciative of all these ministerial reflections in terms of thinking about data sharing, the level of collaboration needed across different ministries within the government, but also what that means for private sector engagement and, what kind of requests for features for, what based on this level of contextualization, how the ministry can be empowered to make those demands. I see a lot of nodding from Stefina, so I'm going to hand over to Stefina over there, and then we do have a very interesting question that's come in from the audience. So we'll move to Q&A shortly, and then our closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, honey. I really also echo, I really enjoyed listening to sort of the responses from the ministry counterparts as well. I think just something really quick I wanted to add. I think just thinking about scalability and sustainability, it's just that, like from our experience, a lot of the most successful projects that we've had have obviously been, like tri-sectoral, I suppose. Like there's government involved, there's ed tech providers involved, and there's also, as I think someone mentioned here, like the teacher buy-in is super, super important. So the community involvement. I think probably my thought is there a way for us to all think about it? Travis was mentioning essentially thinking about it as an ecosystem, right? So everyone is doing what they're sort of like best at, I suppose. Like I think government has so much value in bringing like legitimacy to things, a macro perspective. There are checks and balances that the government provides us, which perhaps the private sector doesn't necessarily always think about that. But the private sector is super good in terms of, we move fast with innovation. If we have the incentives to be, if we have the right incentives in place as well in order to be sustainable and continuously fund our innovation as well, that's something that the private sector brings a lot of immense value to solving specific problems, right? Like we at GIPIN, we think a lot about how we can help the government sort of extend their impact, to like certain areas where like, okay, can we take the government curriculum, can we expand it further? And I think something that I would love to see on an ecosystem sort of level is, are there the right incentives that we can also provide to our private sector friends so that they can help solve problems in each different area that they are kind of like focused in? And then obviously, of course, all of the solutions that we bring there should also be things that really help the teachers do what they do best, which is to teach. They take care of the kids. They really help to like deliver everything. They prioritize the right solutions in the classroom and whatnot. And they make it sustainable, right? Because they have that ownership at the end of the day. So I think like, if we think about sustainability, actually it's all of us sort of doing what we do best, but like ideally, I suppose all of the incentives aligning, right? So maybe like private sector, maybe we have some homework to do on how do we measure metrics that make sense for government to digest too, so they can put it in their policies, right? It's a two-way street. It's not just one way. So yeah, I think that's something that's interesting for us to sort of discuss later. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefina. I'm gonna hand over to Kim, and perhaps she has some reflections on what you've just shared or what others have said.
Thank you so much. Just probably jumping from what Stefina mentioned, just on circling back on the policy question. So just in terms of policy and private sector engagement, I think one policy innovation is probably allowing for more participatory governance and really opening up conversations with stakeholders more so that these collaborations, these bright ideas shared in meeting rooms, in Zoom calls, are more regular and sustained rather than one-off. So having these conversations on incentives, measures that matter, relevant solutions, so on and so forth, that matter for all stakeholders involved, may it be government, non-government, or private sector. So just that on policy recommendation, just opening up that governance mechanism to for participation among different stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As much, I wish I could, I wish we had like a half a day workshop on this topic because I think there's so much more to untangle. For the sake of time, I am going to bring in one question from our audience. And the question is, I'm gonna test. Okay, I was trying to see. I know I work at EdTech Hub, but I can't seem to share the question. I'll share it in the chat so everyone can see it, perhaps. It's a question around data sharing. So are there any good examples where ministries of education and edtech companies actually share data or insights with each other so that the solutions offered are really tailored to different types of students? And if so, how do they make sure that student data is properly protected in the process? So let's see if anyone from our panelists would like to answer this.
Just touch briefly on it. We're just experimenting with this right now. The data protection is really important and how it's being shared. With being able to work with local schools and then working on something very specific in terms of, I mean, this is test related, but it's at least it's a small step forward. Being able to allow them to have a large question test bank in order to be able to test their students, and they can measure the effectiveness of their students and get instant feedback on strengths and weaknesses. That data is really useful for them because that's something that they would normally have to do with paper-based tests. But being able to track that for a class, for a school, for a region, that stuff can be very valuable long term. But the key is the implementation again, is that how is it being delivered? Are the questions very similar? We're just in the early phase of creating this though. And it's something that's very valuable. Like, teachers find it extremely valuable. One, it saves time. Two, because of the data that they're able to collect and it already compiles for them, it becomes very useful already. It's just something that we don't necessarily have a lot of access to, or our teachers in public schools don't have a lot of access to begin with. So it's a starting point. So as we start to work more with the teachers and then with the schools for the type of data that they want, this stuff will help move forward and finding ways and better solutions in terms of just data sharing and data management. I think it's something that I've always, we have very specifically focuses on data-driven decision-making, and collecting data, analyzing data is something that is extremely interesting for me. And I have always thought about it on pace for students in this country, given the fact that they spend so much time in school and out of school just studying constantly. Is it effective? Is it not? How can we really measure this stuff? So that way we know what works and then how to move forward from that. So we're early phase. It's going well so far, but it's too late to see if it's really proving any value at this point. Sorry, it's too early to know if it's proving value. It's not too late.
I see a hand up from Director Jerson, please.
Yeah, I have some concrete examples. So most of these data, the things that whether edtech providers share with us, mainly it's that way. That direction is mainly through aggregate data, and these are insights on how some of the users that are from our ecosystem, whether they're teachers or students, whether it's a pilot or whether it's a much more larger implementation, they share with us some insights. So for instance, here's a concrete example in Canva. So Canva is a tool where you could make graphic design tools. There's templates. Teachers love them a lot. We have something called, I don't know what you call it, like tar papel. It's like they create large posters and then they use Canva to lay out these posters into much more larger A1, A2 sized posters. Students also use them. When we met with them recently, they shared with us some of the top search keywords that Filipino teachers and learners have in the platform. And you think that tells us a lot about what our users, what teachers and students value when it comes to graphic design or when it comes to creating some of these outputs. So there are some instances there where some of our edtech providers will provide these more actionable steps or more actionable insights to us that will, I guess, inform how we, let's say, deliver or plan our learning resources. Where are the gaps? Where's the interest? Where's the need? Sometimes, again, pilots also. I think I mentioned earlier in the in the chat that, for instance, in Khan Academy, it's one of our partners as well. They have a tool called Khanmigo for teachers, which is an AI tool that allows teachers to save time by whether creating prompt questions or lesson planning questions or some other tools that help ease the burden of the teachers when they're preparing for lessons. And some of the surveys that they have is they've reported to us the number of hours saved or the number of days saved because of the use of these tools as well. So of course, again, these are reported data from our partners. They're using more aggregate data and then sharing these insights with us. So then that also helps us think about what are the behaviors of our target users, whether teachers or learners within these platforms. Yeah, so those are just some examples as well of how a platform could definitely help and be that source of insight on how teachers and learners are using technology. And these are also not self-reported data, but this is data from the monitoring dashboards that they have, which I assume is also a bit different, right? If you ask a teacher or a learner about something and they self-report the data, there's some form of bias here and there. But if it's the actual number of hours used, the trends in a search engine and all of that, and as long as it's larger scale, we don't really target who the teacher used that. We don't have the ability to do that. So of course, data privacy as well. Yeah, but those are just some concrete examples.
If I can just share our Malaysian experience, yeah.
Yes,
When
Madam Anisa, if we could keep it to 1 minute for the sake of time, because then we'll
All
need
right,
to move.
okay. So I just want to mention about our Delima platform. So now it's like now we're moving towards 3.0, whereby we're going to use AI to personalize students' learning, because we have been collecting the data for the past 4-5 years. So we intend to use AI so that the students we will personalize their learning, as well as be able to suggest what's next for the kids. Because for Delima, it's like single sign-on, and the students have access to many platforms, many apps using that one password only. So it's going to be it's easy for the kids. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Madam Anisa. Now, if we are just going to wrap up, thank you everyone for such valuable contributions. I just want to say that one thing that's really come to light to me is the complex layers of actors and systems required to scale interventions for marginalized learners in the region. What I love about our panel today is that our panelists all place learners in the center of tech, as we discussed how effectiveness is not only about scores, it's also about experience and relevance to all school actors. So, within this, we talked about systems that enhance the role of parents and the role that parents play in the learner's experience. We talked about the role that teachers play, as well as the fact that learners access learning from various different institutions that are outside formal schooling, in addition to any EdTech solutions. Another example that came to play was on how we can relate effectiveness through the experience of teachers, thinking about how time has been saved by teachers that often are very burdened in the classroom. We also found agreement between ministries and with the private sector about a need to align on a few things, which begins with design principles and features that center around marginalized learners, recognizing that marginalization itself is on a spectrum, which will vary from learner to learner and country to country. But then finally, we got into a very invigorated discussion about the complexities of data privacy that may impede how we kind of interlink or make our different systems inoperable. And I think these are points for further discussion around how we mobilize all these different complex actors within the system from different ministries within a particular government, which then touch on online, child protection, on data privacy, on partnerships, as well as, obviously the educational expertise of the ministries of education and the EdTech expertise of private sector partners. So with that, just really incredibly happy to bring this diverse group together to launch our EdTech landscape analysis. My colleague Jill will just share a slide once it's just loading up, because this is just the beginning of what we'll be discussing ahead. So if you scan this QR code, you'll download resources from today's webinar, but also please keep in mind we will slowly be releasing a series of fireside chats where we will dive deeper into various topics and themes of the EdTech landscape analysis. But I really want to, before handing over to our colleagues from FCDO for closing remarks, I want to thank Dr. Irshad from the Ministry of Education Indonesia, Director Jerson from Philippines DepEd, Madam Aniza from Ministry of Education Malaysia, as well as our EdTech providers, Kim from Let's Read, Stefina from Kipin, and Travis from ViewHop. So thank you so much for making this a very lively discussion. And I will now hand over to Isla Gilmore, an FCDO Education Advisor from the UK Mission to ASEAN.
Thank you so much. Can I just check if you can hear me?
I can hear you, Isla.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. My name is Isla Gilmore, Education Advisor, and I'm based, as Hani said, at the UK Mission to ASEAN in Jakarta. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. What a fabulous discussion. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, bringing together regional experts from governments and from the private sector. Thank you so much to the panelists and for those who joined the call. Through the ASEAN UK SAGE programme, which funded the landscape analysis, we are committed to supporting marginalised learners in Southeast Asia to access quality education and build the skills they need to thrive. I was due to make remarks at the beginning of the session, but technology failed me and I could not connect, hence why I'm speaking to you now. It made me think a lot, though, harder throughout the discussion about teachers and marginalised children in areas where connectivity is a key barrier to digital access. I wanted to pick out a few things that resonated from today's session. And this is the great thing about doing closing remarks, because you get to reflect. I can't do justice to all the rich content from all the experts on the call, but just a few things. I think it was really insightful for me to hear from ministry colleagues on their policy context and how they're driving digital learning. We also heard from the private sector providers on how to enhance partnerships and bring technology to communities through piloting and scaling innovations. A few things they discussed, like the importance of offline models, and one of the providers remarked removing the fear and danger from digital models. And as a parent of children who increasingly have access to tech and the internet, this certainly resonated with me. We heard about locally driven innovations for relevance, contextualization, and how to measure this. Importantly, we discussed effectiveness. How do we know if technology is working? And as a donor, this is a priority for us. We aim to support governments to have access to evidence of what works to improve access and learning. And I really thoroughly enjoyed listening to the dialogue on what to measure. It is one of my favorite topics, as the EdTech Hub are aware. Is technology improving access? Is it improving classroom interactions? Is it relevant, usable, meaningful? Is it driving inclusion? And how does it make students feel? And again, as a parent, this is a very important one. Are they having fun? Are they enjoying it? But of course, ultimately, we can't get away from, does it help to improve learning? And also for whom? We talked about the most difficult part, scale. A few things I picked up: agree on the problem we're trying to solve, execute fast, fail quickly, and adapt. Co-design for scale and focus on the ecosystem, aligning incentives and enable everyone to do what they do best. I really liked this. So I hope you will agree that the EdTech landscape analysis is a valuable step in helping governments, providers, and funders to identify, evaluate, and scale EdTech interventions. Thank you to the EdTech Hub and all the panelists again today for the insightful discussion. I feel hopeful that the analysis and today's discussion have sparked stronger collaboration and more effective use of EdTech across the region, and I look forward to further dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isla. Thank you to all our guests, our audience, our panelists. And again, this is just the beginning. Please stay tuned. We're going to be publishing a blog with some of the insights that have come out of this session. in addition to our series of fireside chats. So again, thank you so much on joining us in this launch, and congratulations to my colleagues Nima, Jaslyn, April, Delaney, and others that actually led this landscape analysis. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please feel free to get in touch with us if you have further questions.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Anissa.
Thank
See you at
you.
Bed Asia.
Yeah,
Right,
see
see
you
you.
in KL.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.